Good afternoon. Welcome to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, broadcasting from Melbourne, Australia. And we are continuing our series on the Macedonian question, in particular, the scholarly publication by Prof.d-r Igor Janev titled The Prespa Agreement as Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity towards the termination of an illegal treaty. This is a 2023 publication by Prof.d-r Igor Janev, an expert on international law and a professor and a writer, author of many books related to international law. We are concentrating on chapter 4. In conclusion, says Professor Igor Janev, the Prespa Agreement was not only illegal treaty with the consequences of the human rights, this is ethnocide and cultural genocide, but the Prespa Agreement certainly influenced the Bulgarian assimilation plans, not only in the cultural dimensions, but literally creating conditions for military options and annexation. Now, you remember the previous broadcast contains information about these things, Macedonia agreeing to have the military from Kosovo be present in Macedonia, and all sorts of other things going on. So in conclusion, says the professor, the Prespa Agreement certainly influenced the Bulgarian assimilation plans, not only in the cultural dimensions, but literally creating conditions for military options and annexation. Annexation means division or partitioning, especially taking into consideration the Tirana Platform, that's the Great Albanian Platform, and involvement of military and religious factors from Kosovo and Turkey, even related to the Tehran and Saudi Arabia. Instead of stabilization of the region, the UNSC, that is the United Nations Security Council Resolution 817, and its effects and outcome from the Prespa Agreement actually inflamed and worsened prospects for regional peace and stability, providing for worst possible scenarios, including the new Balkan War and possible division of Macedonia. For that reason, Professor Igor Janev says that he proposes to the next Macedonian government, and there will be elections in May this year, very soon, he proposes to the next Macedonian government, presumably led by the VMRO political party, currently in opposition, unilateral termination of the Prespa Agreement, since this move can be the only option for Macedonian survival. In order to solve the problem relating to the Macedonian name, it's not needed only to terminate the Prespa Agreement, says Igor Janev, but to establish the previous constitutional name, Republic of Macedonia, in the United Nations. At the moment of conclusion of the PA, Macedonia already had its constitutional name. The name is Republic of Macedonia, and contrary to the domestic and international law, under the imposed provisional denomination of FYROM or FYROM from the Security Council Resolution 817, the Prespa Agreement was born with no valid legitimation. So it was not born legally. And contractual ID, there was no contractual ID. There was no ID. The state had no ID. The state that has been admitted by the United Nations under the name of the Republic of North Macedonia has no ID. No ID. No identity. No ID. And without prior consent on some sort of consultative referendum. It should be noted that the democratic government, if it decides to terminate the Prespa Agreement, may face domestic opposition from the Albanian parties in Macedonia. Not in Albania, but in Macedonia. And they call themselves Albanian parties, and foreign Western allies, that's the European Union and the rest of them, after the letter of termination will be sent to the Greek government, accompanied with the notice to the United Nations that that act was terminated. Domestically, that government may even not survive, and Western allies or diplomats will probably show up to stop the whole process. Hopefully, no such thing will happen. Hopefully, there'll be no interference from Western allies, diplomats, or Western countries, or EU, or whatever it is, Britain. Only strong people governing Macedonia may dare to terminate that illegal act. It is important that after termination of the treaty, the Macedonian politicians and diplomats try to explain that the act of termination, explain it to the Western diplomats, because they may not know, it may need explaining, says the professor. Particularly, the Prespa Agreement was an ethno-genocidal act, and that the only solution is termination of the same. Furthermore, the Macedonian politicians who decide to take this step need to know that a termination of the Prespa Agreement and establishment of a new desired name domestically would not automatically solve the problem in the UN, even if the request for the former name Republic of Macedonia is sent to the UN. As a counter-action, the Greek government may sue Macedonian state at International Court of Justice, employing last article or using the last Article 20, paragraph 9 of the Prespa Agreement, where it is provided that such treaty was irrevocable and on indefinite basis. That actually means that is eternal. That it is eternal. That's unbelievable. The Macedonian diplomats and politicians signed a treaty and agreement with the Hellenic Republic with this Article 20, paragraph 9, which said that such treaty was irrevocable and on indefinite basis. That actually means that it is eternal. Eternal. It should be noted, this kind of stipulation legally doesn't mean much, since Jus Cogens norms were breached. They were breached, and basic states' rights were not honored. Still, Greece may use that paragraph and try to sue the second party being Macedonia, the renamed state, at the International Court of Justice. Well, they may very well do so, but they will not succeed. However, as we explained, these chances for the Hellenic state here at the court are minimal, next to nothing, says the professor. So most likely the outcome of the termination of the Prespa Agreement would be an attempt to start a campaign in the United Nations to reinstate the provisional name previous, you know the one, the insulting one, FIREM, accusing Macedonia for violation of international treaty. Well, they can come up with all sorts of reasons and issue or commence proceedings on all sorts of bases. Hellenic state will address the UN Security Council with that narrative and complain that the new state's policy was or is a threat to international security and regional peace. Again, Silvana speaking now, providing a commentary. They may very well do so, but it hasn't been proven that the change of the name, including the change in the Macedonian constitution, has had anything to do with security. Nothing to do with security. Yeah. At that moment, the Macedonian politicians should first try to explain the ethno-genocidal character of the PA, including elements of cultural genocide, human rights violation, and an inability to perform duties from the Prespa Agreement in a democratic system, particularly illegal obligations limiting rights to national identity, domestic censorship, and all other aspects related to the Jus Cogens norm and independence or sovereignty. Let us pray that there will be some competent and wise people in the Macedonian, among the Macedonian politicians and diplomats this time, and If they need any assistance in understanding or interpreting anything, well, they know where to go, don't they? Professor Igor Janev is the expert on these matters, and this is his paper, and he has offered assistance to them previously. So let's hope the right sort of people will get into government and do the right thing by the people of Macedonia, that is the Macedonians themselves, and the country of Macedonia. We all know the Republic of Macedonia. Okay. So if these explanations work with the traditional Macedonian allies, that is a questionable statement. But nevertheless, I should say, Professor Igor's got it in here, so I shall read it to you again. If these explanations work with the traditional Macedonian allies, that is the United States of America and the EU countries, they will understand the Macedonian position and no new UNSC resolution imposing new obligations would pass the Security Council. Let us hope there'll be wisdom in these people's heads, and they will do the right thing. But if this is not the case, says the professor, Macedonian diplomacy may need to turn for help from Russia and China to block any such resolution that could impose the new duties to negotiate with the Hellenic Republic the changes of its national identity or imposition of a provisional one. In any of these cases, it is advisable that the Macedonian government reinstate the good relations with the non-aligned countries in order to provide the necessary support, either for requesting an advisory opinion hereafter, or from the International Court of Justice in case the UN Security Council passed a resolution discriminating Macedonia as a member state with equal rights in the UN. Or for voting in the UNGA for a new name embedded in section 25147. In case of discrimination with a new imposed denomination on Macedonia, the government of Macedonia should request that the UNGA vote for resolution with the question to the International Court of Justice whether such additional requirements discriminating one member state constitute the breach of the UN membership rights of a sovereign member state in the UN. Here, Macedonia can invoke an advisory opinion of International Court of Justice, 1948, and other UN conventions regarding independent status of the state vis-a-vis the UN. After a delivery of such an opinion of the International Court of Justice by accepting it from the UNGA, in the same or separate UNGA resolution, Macedonia will gain its constitutional name in the United Nations. That is, this country will be provided with the right to use the name Republic of Macedonia. That was the original name when in 1992 Macedonia applied for the UN membership, UN document section 25147. The other scenario could be that the UNSC would not bring a new discriminatory resolution against Macedonia, and that the matter related to the naming of the state could goes directly to the United Nations General Assembly. At that level, to clarify the legal aspect, the General Assembly may or may not vote for a resolution containing the question to the International Court of Justice for advisory opinion, or AO. And if it decides to send such a question to the court, Macedonia should invoke an advisory opinion of the ICJ 1948 that prohibit imposition of additional conditions to the state on its membership and other relevant legal sources as described previously. There is also the possibility that the UNGA decides only to vote for establishing for Macedonia a new name, Republic of Macedonia, taking into account the previous legal UN court's documents, and that would be a vote for a new name recognition with simple majority of the UNGA members present and voting. This option is the most direct way to establish the name Republic of Macedonia in the United Nations, but it is necessary to take into consideration that the Greek resistance will be substantial and that Macedonia will need help from all those countries who previously, before 2019, recognized Macedonia under its constitutional name being Republic of Macedonia. To some extent, this fight over the name in the UN resembles the Kosovo's fight for its recognition in the UN, i.e. their struggle to provide membership in the UN and other universal organizations in order to be universally recognized. In organizations where there is no veto power in the Council of the organization, Kosovo made visible success so far. The important difference between Kosovo and Macedonia is the fact that Macedonia already passed the level of Security Council, and that now all membership issues could be dealt solely in the UNGA. Just bear with me for a second, checking. Yes, you're listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, and we're talking about Professor Dr. Igor Janev's publication, The Prespa Agreement, as cultural genocide of the Macedonian national identity. If the UN Security Council learned some lessons from the artificial dispute over the state's name, that actually so-called difference related to bilateral recognition shouldn't be treated or handled as a security issue, because it's not, then the UNSC may not repeat the same mistake again. Many scholars in Macedonia now believe the UN Security Council until present day do comprehend that this recognition matter should never be treated as have been treated as a security issue, at least not again. But if the problem arises again, as we indicated previously, there is always an opinion to use the advisory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice or the United Nations conventions, starting from the Conventions on Privileges and Immunities of the UN 1946, and start the process at the International Court of Justice. From the theoretical point of view, we should also mention the Vienna Convention on the representation of states in their relations with international organizations of a universal character. In Article 83, Jus Cogens norm of non-discrimination was stipulated. In the application of the provisions of the present convention, no discrimination shall be made as between states. This convention is predicted to come into force in 2022 after 35 signatories deposit their instruments or ratification or succession. According to the norm of that convention, since the party in the convention was the United Nations organization itself, member states are party to the convention may also sue the United Nations before the court for matters covered by the convention. In such cases, that would be for the apparent discrimination of Macedonia in its representation in the UN, committed by the UN organization as an international person, violating legal status and contractual capacity of the member state. Although this could be the ultimate option for a state suffering sort of mobbing in a broader meaning in the United Nations, the Macedonian academic community at this moment is more prepared to support classical approaches through the UNGA or eventually the ICJ in achieving the goal of the establishment of the genuine name Republic of Macedonia in the United Nations. At the end of our study, we may derive a conclusion that it is up to Macedonian people and their capacity to tolerate the new name of the state and the new national identity. The indication for their readiness to reject that oppression could be a level of dissatisfaction with the current government headed by Zaev, Prime Minister Zaev. Well, he's not currently the Prime Minister, but he was at the time when this research document was done. With respect to that, we noted, and yes, the people are dissatisfied even with his replacement because he represents the same party, ruling party. So with respect to that, we noted that at the 17th of October 2021, in the local elections, Zaev's party SDSM, after 4 years of undisputable prevail over the opposition VMRO-DPMNE, was defeated for the first time. VMRO-DPMNE called to topple the Zaev's government Finally, that happened on the 31st of October 2021 in the second round of the local elections, when Zaev's party SDSM was completely defeated and Zaev resigned as the prime minister and the president of the party SDSM. High turnout of voters, around 50%, indicated strong disappointment among the people with the policies of Zaev's government and the party he represented. Still, says Professor Dr. Igor Janev, that convincing victory of the opposition headed by the V.3 related to the fall of Zaev's government in 2021 appears to be only for a very small step, in the right direction. The following administration of Prime Minister Dimitar Kovacevski, a new leader, currently the new leader, unfortunately, remained devoted, or well, he's not, because at the moment they're in election mode. I beg your pardon. The following administration of Prime Minister Dimitar, a new leader, remained devoted to continue the same policies as his predecessor Zaev. As we shall see in the following discussion with respect to recent events, Kovacevski's advanced processes of assimilation of Macedonians into Bulgarians that would most likely produce extreme damaging impact for national survival. You've been listening to Silvana Pavlovska and In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska on our YouTube channel. And we've been talking about Chapter 4 contained in the publication by Professor Dr. Igor Janev titled The Prespa Agreement as Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity. Well, that was the end of Chapter 4, so I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. And we shall begin to share with you Chapter 5 of this amazing, truthful, and factual piece of work. Thank you to Professor Igor Janev for entrusting us to present this document to you, to the public domain. Bye for now.